Before I get into anything, I think it's important to say that this is not a scathing rebuke. I think the only people who are knowledgeable enough to do a scathing rebuke of Threat Interactive are the senior graphics engineers at Epic. This video will hopefully serve as a way for newer developers and lay people to get to know what a lot of people already know in the indie developer community. This is especially important for indie developers, the newer ones, as you might be enticed to follow some of his advice when in fact there's far better ways of doing things. Threat Interactive primarily goes after temporal and AI solutions to problems in game development such as anti-aliasing and upscaling, though he also makes complaints about Unreal Engine. The Unreal Engine content is certainly a little easier to debunk. I think a lot of the complaints about Unreal Engine are very much a bandwagon. A lot of gamers are seeing Unreal Engine and they see that a lot of the games made with it all look the same. However, the game playing in the background right now is my game. As an indie developer, I have to say, please wishlist my game on Steam if you like strategy games, that type of thing. It's made in Unreal Engine, and the gamers very rarely say it looks like it's made in Unreal Engine. That's because it's not going for a hyper-realistic style, it's not using exclusively Quixel assets. The games they identify as being Unreal Engine-based games are the big AAA games which use the very impressive graphics and need Unreal Engine. They all look the same, they all look perhaps soulless, and so a lot of gamers don't like that, when in fact Unreal Engine is perfectly capable of producing a wide variety of different graphical styles. Not just my style, but pretty much anything you can imagine. So if you are a new developer, don't shy away from using Unreal because you think your game will just look like everything else, and definitely don't make your own engine. I've done it, a very simple one, but it's a lot quicker and a lot easier just to use an out-of-the-box engine to learn. A complaint he makes about Unreal, I think the only specifically Unreal complaint I've actually heard from him, is a complaint about Nanite. I'm not going to show the clip as he forced copyright to claim someone else's content for far less, so you'll just have to trust me. But he claims that Nanite is less ideal and not really useful. Now, I kind of have that opinion as well, that Nanite isn't particularly useful for a lot of cases, and it's not useful for my case because my game just doesn't need Nanite. However, what Nanite is it's a different time complexity to traditional rendering. If you're into computer science, you know what time complexity is. It's very simple. We have a graph, and on that graph we have traditional rendering. It's kind of a straight line. The more triangles you have, the longer it takes to render. However, Nanite is different. It's a logarithmic curve. It means that at the start, there's a big cost to get it going. But the more triangles you add don't really directly map to more time. They do it very slowly, but you could have 10 times as many triangles and it may be only doubling the amount of time it takes, where with traditional rendering, 10 times as many triangles, 10 times the time. Into the main meat of the arguments. One of the claims made by Threat Interactive is that, a lot of scenes are poorly optimized. And I think what he showed off was some sort of giant Romanesque structure, and it was very poorly optimized. It clearly had a lot of lights which weren't needed. They were lights overlapping. They could have just been baked. And, there were like meshes which were far larger in triangle count than they really should have been. It should have just been like 2 triangles, but they were 20, 30 triangles. It could have just, in fact, been a texture applied to the floor. So yes, this was a poorly optimized scene. And he showed that you could optimize it very well using traditional optimization techniques. However, he compared that to someone who clicked the optimize button and got almost as good results. If you're a new developer, don't spend eternity optimizing a scene. Probably best never to make a particularly complicated scene that requires that much optimization. As an indie developer, graphics, major graphics, generally not that important for you. But don't spend forever optimizing, because the game that runs worst on a consumer's computer is the game they never play. That saying might not make an awful lot of sense, but you get what I mean. One optimization that Threat Interactive often goes over is the use of quad overdraw. So quad overdraw is when you have quads, which are basically how your GPU renders anything. There's 4 pixels in a square, and generally if they can all stay within the same triangle, that's great. If not, kind of more expensive for your GPU. And that's something that's kind of, Threat Interactive will really go into. And that is a major thing. It is a thing that impacts performance. However, it's not the only thing that impacts performance. There are many other factors, and it's not necessarily the most important. For instance, in some parts of my game, there's an awful lot of quad overdraw, but it's not the thing necessarily majorly impacting performance. There are other factors, and a very big factor could be, say, there's just something wrong in your scene that's using 20 times so much resources as it should be, and you can very easily change that with the use of, say, a profiler, and that will give far better results in probably less time. Nor is quad overdraw the be-all and end-all of optimization, as Threats Interactive kind of makes it sound like. In reality, there's other major factors such as how many models you're drawing. If you're drawing without instancing an awful lot of models, even if they're relatively small, that's going to kind of take a lot longer than if you're drawing the same number of triangles in a smaller number of models. Threat Interactive makes a great deal of use of highly complex technical terms, which are often used correctly. There are a lot of actual problems with rendering and how modern game developers approach optimization. However, it's not as simple as he makes it out to be. There are a lot of other important competing factors, and if you're a new developer, this definitely isn't the most important thing for you. I will now go on to the more rumor-based, speculation-based, and sort of almost character assassination-based side of this argument. So first of all, Threat Interactive is not a company. As far as anybody can tell, it's one guy, and saying we, as a very small developer, indie developer, is kind of a way to get attention, and it makes you seem more legitimate than just some random dude in the basement. I have tried to find sort of his people, but all I could find is some earlier Reddit posts where he seemed to be getting very few upvotes on some random subreddits. It didn't really seem like people cared that much, which is kind of surprising for a YouTuber with hundreds of thousands of views. The subreddit that liked him the most, or seemed to, was FTAA, which, as you can tell from the name, doesn't like temporal anti-aliasing. However, it seems they now dislike Threat Interactive, and even have some damning evidence that they haven't yet released, so check out their video or whatever when they create it. Now, apart from the false copyright claiming people who criticize you and calling it defamation, there's nothing really that he's done which is problematic. You can say whatever you want on the internet, and that's all fine. Many of his criticisms are very much legitimate, and something that I think a lot of modern game development needs to kind of get a hold of, and something we need to make sure kind of newer developers don't fall into, as a newer developer, cutting edge technology, generally not your friend. Just make a game and get it published. However, what is a problem is when you start asking for about $900,000 to develop a new version of TAA, essentially a new temporal solution, which is something he's criticized quite a lot, and it's strange he would want to create a better version of something he seems to be leading the crusade against. Someone who, as far as I can tell, doesn't really have any credentials for development experience apart from being able to optimize, correct me if I'm wrong and there is something legitimate he's worked on, shouldn't be the guy who's trying to essentially do massive amounts of research to find a better solution than the massive companies like Nvidia and Epic and Unity and all the other game engines and everybody else in graphics programming. You're probably not going to do better than these billion-dollar companies on your own. So that seems to be maybe a scam, but maybe he doesn't necessarily think he's scamming people and he's just taking money for something that legitimately a company called Threat Interactive could potentially do, but in the end it's kind of difficult to, make revolutionary technology when seemingly you have no experience in the field. I don't know if he's written a game engine. I have. They're not particularly hard to write if you're just talking about a very simple one. You can do it in a week or two. And his claim about making a more optimized Unreal Engine, that already exists. You can strip aspects from Unreal Engine to make it more optimized all you want. You can also generally just not use the stuff in your game. Unreal Engine, will hit a very high FPS if you just don't use certain parts of it. My game often gets very high FPS because it simply is not a very demanding game. So you can make your mind up whatever you want to think about Threat Interactive, but it's not as simple as he's making out to seem. That's pretty much it. If you are a newer developer, don't fight in a crusade against TAA and Unreal Engine. Just follow the regular tutorials and get to know what you should be doing. If you did enjoy this video or learn something from it, please like and subscribe. It would help me grow this channel and my game.